Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to welcome you to today's session on solar mini-grids, Best Practices for Regulatory Frameworks, Part 2. I would like to thank the International Solar Alliance and the Clean Energy Solutions Center who facilitate this webinar series. Some background from me. Before I joined Factor in 2010, I have been Director for Policies and Finance at the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. I was responsible for the design of the Access to Energy Work Program in the agency. Previously, as a Spanish civil servant, I have been involved in many national and European regulations for the promotion of renewable energies and energy efficiency. In this lecture, we are continuing the discussion on mini-grids from the previous lecture and dig deeper into the regulatory and policy frameworks. In this lecture, we will, as always, start with a brief description and definition of what a solar mini-grid are, and afterwards jump into the main body of the presentation. Don't forget that at the end of the presentation, you will be given the chance to test your knowledge with a little quiz. The learning objective which this lecture aims to provide will consist of the missing components of the overall enabling environment, which we have started to look at in the previous webinar. Specifically, the learning objective can be divided into 4 parts. First off, we will continue to finish looking at the energy sector governance aspect, which we have not covered so far, the customer and environmental regulations, as well as the license and contract regulations. This is followed by a discussion of support instruments, namely financial support structures and technical assistance more broadly. A quick backup of the kind of technology we are talking about. A mini-grid, also sometimes referred to as a microgrid or isolated grid, can be defined as a set of electricity generators and possibly energy storage system interconnected to a distribution network that supplies electricity to a localized group of customers. Mini-grids offer an alternative that entirely avoids many of the challenges that new and expensive grid infrastructure investment require. Mini-grid systems are becoming increasingly competitive compared to the cost of traditional grid extension programs and are a key component in achieving universal access to electricity for all. The reason for this are the rapidly decreasing cost of the technology, increasing reliability, and a solid deployment track record, all of which have strengthened the case for the accelerated adoption of mini-grid solar solution across the world. The main body of this module is divided into 4 parts. We will slowly work through the remaining perspective on regulatory frameworks. Technical regulation is required for all operator models to ensure safe and reliable operations for the protection of customers without being obstructive for mini-grid developers and operators. For those of you who are wondering what operator models I am referring to, please have a look at the first part of this 2-part module. Technical regulation for mini-grids should be designed, published, and controlled by one responsible regulator and should have the following specific aspects. Minimum technical standards for mini-grids generation and distribution networks, including minimum safety requirements, allowable voltage and frequency variation, as well as harmonic distortion. Operating and maintaining requirements. And thirdly, safe and robust interconnections between the utility and the mini-grids in line with grid standards. These technical standards should be specifically designed for the rural context, but should be in line with the national utilities grid standard. It may also be necessary to adopt the utilities standard to the rural context and mini-grids. Regular control of mini-grids and their adherence to technical regulation, as well as verifying compliance with construction codes and standards before becoming operational, and continuing with ongoing technical monitoring are required. The disbursal of performance-based subsidies can be linked to the adherence of these standards. Deficient components can jeopardize not only the smooth functioning, but also the financial viability of the businesses. International standards can be used to safeguard quality and sustainability. The International Electrotechnical Commission, the IEC, Technical Specification Series 62257 is a comprehensive set of standards covering the technical and organizational aspect of mini-grids. This standard provides a comprehensive and logical framework for the design, installation, and maintenance of mini-grids, with a particular emphasis on safety, user-friendliness, and efficiency. Moreover, the standards give an overview on important contractual questions and technical implementation plans. On the other hand, business plans, financing scheme, and the range of social challenges, such as embedding the project into community, are not covered by this series. The IEC 62257 series serves as a checklist for good practices. Following these recommendations can ensure that project developers pursue a comprehensive logical framework. However, the IEC 62257 cannot guarantee that project developers make the right decision, for example, in terms of dimensioning. For quality assurance purposes, it is useful to keep in mind the specific IEC standards for system components, notably those for PV modules and batteries. The most important ones are shown here in the right blue box. IEC standards is 1215 and IEC standards is 1646 are connected with quality for crystalline silicon terrestrial photovoltaic modules and thin film terrestrial photovoltaic modules respectively. And IEC 61730 is concerned with safety of PV modules, including requirements for construction and testing. Also for PV modules, it is important to have solid testing for the performance and the dataset which allowed for comparison. Quality of service has three main components: quality of the product, quality of supply, and quality of commercial service. Quality of product refers to the technical parameters stated in the technical regulation, such as the frequency and voltage of electricity, and also to the quality levels of energy generated and distributed. Quality of supply refers to the availability in hours per day and continuity, measured in blank hours of supply. Quality of commercial services includes measures such as the number of days to connect a household, resolve complaints, and reconnect customers. For each of the three quality of services areas, 5 basic design questions has to be answered. What dimensions of quality of service will be regulated? What minimum levels of services will be required for each quality of services dimension? Who sets the standard? How are the standards monitored? How are the standards enforced? The quality of services regulations can be established and implemented by the regulator or a renewable energy agency. In all cases, the regulatory agency involved must establish a quality of services standard that are realistic and affordable to all parties, and that can be monitored and enforced. The regulator should establish a mechanism and a contract point for customer complaints. Mini-grids, especially renewable energy-based mini-grids, are usually environmentally friendly compared to traditional or conventional energy sources, and local environmental sustainability can be ensured with appropriate standards and norms. In order to ensure the effectiveness of such standards, policymakers have to understand the full scope of environmental impacts with respect to mini-grids deployment. Generally, one can distinguish between direct impact, indirect impacts, and cumulative impacts. Direct impacts include, for instance, land use and land use change. This impact applies to distribution lines, powerhouses, access roads, and related issues include, for example, soil erosion and water pollution from construction, or deforestation that contributes to habitat loss for wildlife and economic loss for communities, such as in terms of food sources, pest control, water storage, and erosion control. Localized pollution is another serious direct issue, entailing, for example, air pollution, such as from fossil fuels and bioenergy, or water and soil contamination from waste and bioproducts, such as from bioenergy, fossil fuels, and battery leakage. Further, battery waste management requires special attention, and depending on the type of battery used in solar and wind systems, there could be hazardous materials such as lead or cadmium that need special handling and disposal systems. Battery manufacturers realize the hazardous effects of batteries and have started setting up centers to recycle them. Finally, water diversion or impoundment can be an issue with hydropower facilities that use them to storage river water reservoirs, which may alter the water's location and flow. Water diversion or impoundment can affect people as well as plants and wildlife that depend on access in certain locations. Changes can also impact water quality and change land uses. Indirect impacts. Material production can entail indirect impacts, for example, as the panel production requires the mining of silica and metals, and the solar panel manufacturing process can produce air emission and toxic waste. From the fuel source, further indirect impacts can arise, such as with biomass-based energy, which involves the combustion as a feedstock to generate electricity, which has impact on air quality, water use, land use, and life cycle global warming emission. Finally, the end user industry may have environmental impacts through increased use of materials and the production of waste streams. Cumulative impacts, even when the direct and indirect environmental impacts are minimal for a single mini-grid, several mini-grids can result in significant cumulative impacts. For example, batteries for energy storage for a single mini-grid can be contained without causing significant pollution. However, hundreds of batteries in an area without a system for recycling or disposal can lead to significant soil and groundwater contamination with noticeable public health impact. Another example is the ongoing debate over the cumulative environmental impact of bioenergy initiatives, driving impacts on global food and land use systems. Procedures and requirements for conducting environmental impact assessments should be straightforward, simple, and clear. Obtaining an environmental approval should be prompt when all the requirements are fulfilled and procedures are observed. Depending on strategic policy decision on the operator model, specific licenses, permitting, concession, and contractual, for instance, PPAs requirements have to be clarified. These requirements should be adapted to local circumstances and the size of the regulated mini-grid. Also keep in mind, very small microgrids, for instance, below a capacity of 100 kilowatts, should face less stringent licensing and contractual requirements. Licenses or permisses give the non-exclusive right to generate, distribute, and sell electricity in some countries. All necessary activities for operating a mini-grid are included in one license. In others, a license for generation and a separate concession for distribution and electricity sales are required. The owner or operator of the mini-grid or the individual owners and operator of distribution or generation asset in the case of hybrid operator models must have the legal right to exist and to generate, transmit, distribute, and sell electricity services. eventual conflicts with the license granted to the national utility had to be resolved. These rights are best granted by the responsible regulator or ministry. In some countries, the responsible regulator could also use simplified registration for systems under a specified capacity size. Generation permits and licenses may be granted on an exclusive or non-exclusive basis. The licensing regime should always specify the role and duties of the providers, set information filling requirements, and ensure consumer protection mechanisms. Both permits and licenses can include detailed preconditions like land lease permits or environmental impact assessment and specify operating conditions, for example. Service quality and tariff specifications. The licensing regime should also take into account the rights of generation and distribution assets owner in case the main grid connects to the mini-grid. The process to acquire licenses or permits should be clear and cost-effective in order to reduce transaction costs for mini-grid developers. Permanent exception from obtaining a license or permit for a small mini-grids, such as, for example, can be seen in Tanzania, up to 100 kilowatt, and Mali, up to 20 kilowatt, reduces transaction costs and thus increases financial viability of projects. Provisional license, providing exclusivity for a few years to conduct preparatory activities such as an assessment study, financial structuring, land acquisition, or construction, are beneficial to the development of mini-grids and also make the process of obtaining general business documents such as incorporation, tax registration, and building permits easier. However, case-by-case exceptions from licensing for pilot projects are counterproductive as they create confusion among developers and could encourage corruption. This could also prevent mini-grids owners from growing and formalizing their businesses, raising finance, or selling their businesses. A concession is a contract between a public and private entity granting the exclusive right to invest, operate, and maintain the distribution assets and sell electricity to end users for a given number of years in specified geographic service areas. In this area, the holder of the concession also has an investment, operation, and maintenance responsibility for a specified time. Thus, a concession also binds the private operator to deliver a specific quality of services and a certain number of connection or electrified population. Holding the concession for the specified area often entails favorable terms. For instance, a guarantee that no other party are allowed to develop and operate mini-grids in the same area, preferential tariff arrangement, and possibly financial incentive. Concession schemes, which award concession for larger areas through competitive bidding, allow the holder to bundle cluster mini-grid projects and reach scale fast. The aggregation of mini-grid projects increases efficiency in planning, financing, program administration, equipment supply, operation and maintenance, and thus reduce individual project costs and improves overall profitability. In general, governments should ensure that the size of the service area and the terms of the concession are suitable for local conditions and should not grant indefinite exclusive rights. The concession is usually awarded through a competitive bidding scheme which should deliver the lowest overall cost for the most connections. The bidding can, for example, be based on a fixed subsidy level from the government, with bidders competing on the number of connections and the level of service they will provide. As the goal is to provide access to electricity, the competitive bidding scheme should be technology neutral to increase the flexibility of project developers. Ladies and gentlemen, a quick reminder where we are right now. In the first part, we have talked about A, energy policy, and B, economic policy and regulation. So far, in the second part, we have talked about C, customer and environmental regulation, and D, licenses and contract regulation. We will now shift the focus to appropriate instruments which aim to support the energy sector governance and the fiscal policies and regulations, namely E, the financial support, and F, technical assistance. Financial and economic aspects play an important role in promoting development and safe operation of mini-grids. Policy and regulations can help to create and ensure long-term stability of cash flows for operator models. The main influencing factors include consumers' payment, as for example, tariffs and connection fees, government support, as for example, grants and subsidies, finance streams from investors, so in other words, equity and loans, and other fiscal incentives such as tax, duty breaks, performance bonuses, etc. The role of policymakers and regulators is not only to establish these instruments, but also to approve mini-grids which are eligible for funding or support. This is mostly done by a rural electrification fund, which directly provides grants and subsidies. E1 grants and subsidies. Subsidies and grants are financial support instruments that incentivize actors to provide electricity in regions and to population groups that lack the financial means to afford the full cost of electricity by themselves. In general, for mini-grids, the combination of subsidies, tariffs, and connection fees has to cover all costs incurring during planning, implementation, and operation of the mini-grid in order to enable long-term operation. Subsidies may also result in lower tariffs for customers. Designing a grant and subsidy regime is challenging but essential. Grants and subsidies should be affordable for the country to allow scaling up beyond a few pilot projects and upgrading of existing mini-grids. In most countries, this means that subsidies should be as low as possible and as high as necessary. In general, subsidies have to be high enough to allow affordability for customers to increase electricity access and thus increase electricity demand and improve the economics of the electricity system, which in turn can attract more investment. Further, a dedicated agency, most often a rural electrification fund, has to manage these grants, approve eligible mini-grids, and monitor the proper use of these funds. For mini-grids, these grants or subsidies can be provided during the project planning pre-investment phase, for example, for feasibility studies, business plan development, technical planning, capacity building, and reservation costs, during implementation construction, for example, as capital subsidies, connection subsidies, or during operation, for instance, as operational subsidies or tariff top-up. Subsidies can also be made available to the mini-grid operator upon reaching certain milestones, which in that case, one would refer to as result-based subsidies. It is further recommended to include provisions for phasing out the grant and subsidies scheme. Access to debt is one of the key challenges for mini-grid developers. There are various mechanisms to facilitate lending, each of which may be supported by policy and regulation. These include publicly backed debt facilities to eliminate or reduce the need for commercial lenders with market risk return requirements, loan guarantees to offset default risk assumed by lenders such as commercial banks, political risk insurance to underwrite country risk, currency exchange rate risk mitigation instruments, and broader insurance to cover commercial and other risks. A publicly backed debt or credit enhancement facility may provide or facilitate long tenor, low interest loans that commercial lenders will not offer on their own and may be administered by a national public entity. One example is the European Investment Bank's Renewable Energy Performance Platform, which will provide projects with a mix of credit enhancement, results-oriented support, technical assistance, and debt financing needed to become bankable for commercial investors and lenders. Loan guarantee provided by national banks or special facilities to commercial lenders may compensate the lender in the event of default. political risk insurance, available, for instance, for the World Bank's Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency or African Trade Insurance, may protect commercial lender against the risk of a public utility or other governmental entity failing to perform on its contractual obligations. Insurance for commercial and other non-political risks, while utilized in other sectors, have largely not been deployed for African mini-grid projects due to the small scale of mini-grid projects, high transaction costs, and the lack of substantial balance sheets of most of developers. However, significant underlying commercial and political risks remain inherent in the mini-grid model and in African countries and other countries. Currency exchange risk can be an issue when large amounts of local currency receivables are to fund operators' debt and the local currency weakens. The best and natural solution would be to borrow local currency in the first place in order to reduce foreign currency finance asset component. Governments committing to achieving private sector investment in mini-grids should actively engage in transparent and constructive dialogue with the stakeholders to identify innovative ways to address these risks and establish precedents. Such precedents will lead to an increasingly replicable and scalable financial transaction. F1 technical needs and technical assistance. The following slides highlight instruments and activity that policymakers can introduce to improve capacity on 3 levels: on the individual level, on the organizational level, and for the enabling environment. In relation to mini-grids, capacity can be defined as the ability of people, organization, and society to manage their affairs successfully. Capacity development can be defined as the process whereby people, organization, and society create, adapt, strengthen, and maintain capacity over time. Technical assistance can be provided for the general public in the form of awareness raising, for the workforce in the form of vocational training, for the mini-grid project developers by providing information, guidelines, and recommendations to financing institutions, as well as to the public institutions that are in charge of the aforementioned instrument at the different levels. Technical assistance can be either provided by a national public entity, by a separate body, or by different national and international actors on specific activities. Technical assistance may address a range of areas. Awareness raising and promotion provide information to the general public. This may include cost information and comparison of different technologies and products, realistic grid extension plans, explanation of priority areas for grid connection, and the date on which villages can expect to be connected to the grid. This information will allow them to make an informed decision on the acceptance of mini-grids. A specific human capacity has to be developed to implement, manage, finance, and regulate mini-grid projects. Governments can facilitate finance, training, and capacity development. The training curricula should depend on the vocation and be based on sound technical, managerial, financial, and regulatory knowledge of mini-grids. Accurate data is essential because policy, regulation, and project planning should be based on the reality on the ground and on current government plans. The most important data for project developer is detailed information on the national grid extension plans, data on the local socioeconomic situation of communities and households, as well as detailed renewable resources surveys are also beneficial for policymakers, regulators, and project developers. Also, public institutions need the capacity to implement policy and regulations. This requires clear responsibilities, adequate financial resources, and qualified and motivated staff. Technical assistance measures to build institutional capacity should first assess the situation, subsequently identify areas of intervention, and finally implement well-designed capacity development activities such as training, seminars, exchange programs, etc. We continue the list. The following areas are also potential points to be addressed. For instance, a further effective technical assistance instrument is the promotion of thematic public networks. There are generally various public institutions involved in regulating and supporting the mini-grid sector. thus institutionalize and regular meetings of decision makers in the public institutions that are responsible for the implementation of mini-grid policies and regulations. For instance, on a quarterly basis, it is advised and can be supported by technical assistance measures. Furthermore, technical assistance can provide project developer guidelines, ideally through a stakeholder consultation process. The content will typically be on national definition and classification of mini-grids, extracts of relevant electricity access and renewable energy policies, laws and regulations, extracts of relevant non-electricity sector policies, laws and regulations, description of fiscal and other incentive of mini-grid development, descriptions of the project development and approval process, definition of licensing procedures and requirements, descriptions of applicable tariff and technical regulations. Technical assistance can also coordinate the reporting structure between international donors, finances, and authorities. The fragmented and complex reporting requirements impose considerable transaction cost on mini-grids operators. Harmonizing reporting will ease the reporting burden considerably. Technical assistance may also support community involvement. The higher the participation of the community, the more likely it is that the mini-grid will be accepted. Communities can be involved in decision, and procedures should be in place for communities to file grievance and, if needed, effect changes. As concluding remarks, the mini-grid policy and regulatory framework comprises the binding rules, the strategies, institutions, and associated processes that govern the mini-grid sector. It is developed and adopted by public bodies, including parliament and government agencies, and it determines whether and how mini-grid development takes place, as well as whether and through which modules mini-grids are developed, implemented, and operated. In this second part, we have learned that customer and environmental regulations and standards are necessary for maintaining quality of services across all dimensions, while also adhering to sustainability concerns. We have also learned that the supporting instruments which policymakers can draw on are highly important in order to allow project developers to develop and scale businesses profitable and sustainable. Especially in rural settings, this is important as enabling environments are lacking and inadequate. With this, we are coming to an end. I would like to thank you for your attention. As always, I would like to invite you to test your understanding with the following small quiz.